You still order your steak medium rare, just like your brother did. Ethan Cole's hand stopped halfway to the table. The silver fork hovered in the air for one long second as the noise inside Blackstone Prime suddenly felt distant, muffled, unreal. The jazz piano near the bar kept playing softly beneath the warm amber lights, but to Ethan, it sounded like it was underwater. His pulse slowed, then spiked, because there was only one person in the world who used to say that sentence to him, and his brother had been dead for 5 years. Across the restaurant, crystal glasses shimmered beneath chandeliers shaped like falling fire. Wealth moved through the room like perfume. Hedge fund managers laughed too loudly near the whiskey wall. A senator from Illinois sat in a private booth behind smoked glass. Waiters in black uniforms drifted silently between tables carrying dry-aged ribeyes that cost more than most people's electric bills. Blackstone Prime was the kind of Chicago steakhouse where people came to celebrate mergers, hide affairs, and shake hands over deals that changed cities. And tonight, sitting alone in the darkest corner of the restaurant, was one of the richest men in America pretending to be nobody at all. Ethan looked down again at the folded white note resting beside his steak knife. The handwriting was neat, calm, deliberate. No signature, no explanation. Just one sentence that reached into the grave and pulled something back out. His jaw tightened. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward the dining room. That was when he saw her. The waitress stood near the service station beneath a hanging shelf of wine bottles, one hand balancing a tray against her hip. Young, black, calm. Her gold name tag caught the light for half a second. Naomi. She wasn't staring at him anymore. In fact, she looked almost careful not to. But Ethan knew instantly the note came from her. He had spent 20 years building companies by reading people faster than they could read him. Fear, greed, ambition, lies. He knew the language of all of it. But this woman unsettled him because her face carried none of those things. Only restraint. And somehow, that frightened him more. Outside, the restaurant windows, rain streaked across downtown Chicago in silver lines. Traffic crawled through the wet streets below, while thunder rolled somewhere far over Lake Michigan. Ethan leaned back slowly in the leather booth, trying to steady the sudden pressure building in his chest. 5 years ago, his younger brother Mason had died after a corporate scandal ripped their company apart. Official reports called it suicide. The media called it guilt. Protesters called Ethan a monster who buried the truth beneath billions of dollars and expensive lawyers. For months, his face had lived on television screens beside words like corruption, betrayal, and blood money. Then one day, Ethan disappeared. Publicly, he claimed he was stepping away from the spotlight to restructure Coal Dynamics. Privately, he stopped trusting everyone around him. Board members, investors, security teams, even old friends. Especially old friends. That was why he was here tonight under a fake name, wearing a plain charcoal jacket instead of one of his custom Italian suits. Someone inside his company had reached out anonymously 3 days ago promising evidence connected to Mason's death. Come alone, the message said. Midnight. Blackstone Prime. Ethan checked his watch. 11:42 p.m., 18 minutes late. Whoever the source was, they still hadn't shown up. But somehow the waitress already knew about his brother. A cold feeling crept quietly down Ethan's spine as Naomi finally glanced toward him again. Just once. Barely a second. But it was enough. Because in her eyes, Ethan didn't see curiosity. He saw recognition. And worse than that, he saw pity. Naomi moved again before Ethan could stop her. 1 second she was standing beneath the wine shelves. The next she disappeared behind the swinging kitchen doors as if she had never been there at all. Ethan stared after her, his fingers tightening around the folded note until the paper bent sharply at the edges. Around him, the restaurant continued breathing in slow luxury. Waiters carried trays glowing beneath warm light. Ice clinked inside crystal tumblers. Somewhere near the piano, a man in a navy suit laughed loud enough to turn heads. But Ethan no longer saw any of it clearly. His mind had already gone backward 5 years to another room, another night, another voice. Mason used to order the exact same steak every Friday after work. Medium rare. Extra peppercorn butter. No asparagus. Life is too short to ruin beef with vegetables, he always joked. It was stupid. Small. The kind of detail no one remembered after someone died. Except somehow she did. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the untouched plate in front of him. Steam still rose from the steak beneath the restaurant lights, carrying the smell of garlic and charred rosemary into the air. Suddenly, he was not hungry anymore. He reached for the glass of bourbon beside his plate, then stopped halfway. Something felt wrong. Not danger exactly. Something quieter than that. Like walking into a room and realizing everyone else knows something you do not. Across the dining room, the front doors opened and a gust of rain-scented wind slipped inside. Ethan looked up automatically. 3 men entered together wearing dark overcoats still damp from the storm outside. One of them caught Ethan's attention immediately. Gray tie, mid-50s, silver hair cut short against his scalp. Calm posture, expensive watch. The kind of face that looked forgettable until you noticed how carefully everyone around him reacted. Staff straightened subtly when he passed. A hostess smiled too quickly. Even the bartender lowered his voice. The man scanned the restaurant once before taking a booth near the back wall. And then his eyes landed briefly on Ethan. Not surprise. Recognition. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He knew that face. Victor Lang, senior board member at Coal Dynamics. One of the last men still standing beside Ethan after the scandal destroyed the company's public image. Loyal, polished, trusted, or at least that was what Ethan used to believe. A server approached Victor's table with menus, but Victor barely looked at them. Instead, he checked his phone, typed something quickly, then glanced toward Ethan again. 2 seconds at most. But it was enough to raise every instinct Ethan had spent decades sharpening in boardrooms and negotiations. Slowly, Ethan slipped his hand into his coat pocket and unlocked the second phone he carried for private communications. No messages. No updates from the anonymous source who arranged tonight's meeting. Nothing except silence growing heavier by the minute. Then the kitchen door opened again. Naomi stepped back onto the floor carrying a tray of drinks balanced carefully on one shoulder. Her expression remained calm, professional, unreadable. But when she passed Ethan's booth, her fingers brushed the edge of the table for half a second. Another folded note slid silently beside his napkin. She never looked at him, never slowed down. She simply kept walking beneath the gold lights while conversations swirled around her like smoke. Ethan unfolded the paper beneath the table with steady hands that did not feel steady at all. This time the message was shorter, more direct. Your brother did not trust Victor Lang. Ethan read the sentence once, then twice. The air inside the steakhouse suddenly felt too warm. His pulse hammered hard enough now that he could hear it behind the piano music. Because 3 weeks before Mason died, he had said almost those exact same words. The memory hit Ethan so hard, he could almost hear his brother's voice again. Watch Victor, Mason had whispered one night inside the executive garage beneath Coal Dynamics headquarters. Rain hammered the concrete outside, while the city lights bled through the windshield of Ethan's black Mercedes. Mason looked exhausted back then. Pale, nervous. Nothing like the younger brother who used to fill every room with reckless energy and terrible jokes. Ethan remembered laughing it off at the time. Victor helped build this company, he had replied. You are being paranoid. Mason never answered after that. He just stared through the rain for a long moment before quietly saying, that is exactly why you should be afraid of him. 3 weeks later, Mason Cole was dead. Ethan blinked hard and looked back toward Victor Lang's booth. The older man sat perfectly composed beneath the amber light, one arm resting near his whiskey glass while he spoke calmly to someone on the phone. No tension, no visible worry. He looked exactly like the kind of executive financial magazines love to photograph beside headlines about leadership and vision. But now Ethan noticed things he had ignored for years. Victor never truly smiled with his eyes, never drank more than half a glass, never reacted emotionally to anything. Even now, while thunder rolled outside and half the city hid from the storm, Victor sat untouched by it all. Controlled, precise, cold. Ethan folded the note slowly beneath the table and glanced toward the kitchen again. Naomi had disappeared once more behind the swinging doors. Every instinct told him to get up immediately and confront her. Who was she really? How did she know Mason? Why wait until tonight to say anything? But another instinct stopped him. The older instinct. The one that helped Ethan survive billion-dollar negotiations and silent betrayals in rooms full of polished smiles. Do not move too fast. Watch first. Listen longer than everyone else. Across the restaurant, a young busboy accidentally bumped a chair near Victor's table. The teenager froze instantly, apologizing under his breath while reaching for a dropped napkin. Victor did not yell. He did not even look irritated. But the boy's hand still shook as he walked away. Fear did not always need volume. Sometimes power lived in silence. Ethan suddenly realized he had spent years becoming exactly that kind of man himself. The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. Near midnight, the dinner crowd had started thinning. Couples gathered coats. Businessmen checked luxury watches and called for drivers. Outside the windows, downtown Chicago glistened black and gold beneath the rain. Ethan loosened his grip on the bourbon glass beside him and finally took a sip. The whiskey burned warm down his throat, grounding him just enough to think clearly again. Then he heard it. Table 12 needs another bottle of Cabernet. Naomi's voice. Calm. Low. Close. Ethan looked up immediately. She stood only a few feet away now beside the service counter, entering something into the restaurant computer. Under the softer light, he noticed details he had missed before. Tired eyes hidden beneath careful composure. Small scar near her wrist. A silver cross necklace resting against the collar of her uniform. She looked young, maybe late 20s, but there was something older in the way she carried herself. The kind of stillness people earned after surviving hard things quietly. Another server approached her carrying dirty plates. You okay? He asked softly. Naomi gave a quick nod that looked almost automatic. I am fine. But Ethan noticed it anyway. The tiny pause before she answered. The tension in her shoulders. She was afraid. Not nervous. Afraid. And suddenly Ethan understood something that made the room feel colder than the storm outside. Those notes were not a game. Naomi Brooks believed someone in this restaurant was dangerous. Before Ethan could stand, his second phone vibrated sharply inside his coat pocket. Unknown number. One new message. Ethan opened it slowly beneath the table. The text contained only 6 words. Leave now if you want answers. Then, almost immediately, a second message appeared beneath it. She is running out of time. The message stayed glowing on Ethan's screen like a warning flare in the dark. She is running out of time. His eyes lifted instantly toward the service counter again, but Naomi was gone. Only empty wine glasses remained where she had been standing moments earlier. Ethan stood up too fast, the leather booth scraping softly against the hardwood floor. Nearby diners glanced over before quickly looking away again, trained by wealth to pretend they noticed nothing uncomfortable. Ethan adjusted the plain charcoal jacket hiding his identity and walked calmly toward the hallway leading to the restrooms and kitchen entrance. Calm on the outside, chaos underneath. Every instinct inside him screamed that something bigger than corporate betrayal was unfolding tonight. The hallway behind the dining room felt different from the polished warmth out front. The music faded here. The air smelled faintly of bleach, coffee, and rainwater dragged in from the alley entrance near the kitchen. Restaurant staff moved quickly through narrow spaces carrying trays and stacked plates, while managers barked quiet instructions into headsets. Nobody paid attention to Ethan. To them he was just another wealthy customer wandering too far from his table after too much bourbon. But Ethan noticed everything. 2 security cameras above the hallway. A back exit slightly cracked open near the loading dock. And Naomi standing alone beside the employee lockers gripping her phone tightly in one hand. She looked up sharply the moment she saw him. For 1 second, real fear crossed her face. You should not be back here, she said quietly. Her voice was lower now. Less polished. More real. Ethan stopped a few feet away beneath the flickering fluorescent light. Up close, Naomi looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone carrying a secret too heavy for too long. Who are you? Ethan asked. Naomi glanced toward the kitchen entrance before answering. You need to leave. Not until you tell me how you knew my brother. The sentence landed hard between them. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly. Her fingers tightened around the phone in her hand. Because my mother knew him. Ethan felt the air shift inside his chest. What? She worked nights at Mercy General downtown. Naomi continued softly. Cardiology wing. 5 years ago your brother came in several times before he died. Panic attacks. Stress. Trouble sleeping. My mother was one of the nurses assigned to him. Ethan stared at her without speaking. Mason never mentioned a hospital. Never mentioned panic attacks. The media painted him as reckless after the scandal broke. Weak. Guilty. Ethan himself had believed part of it. Because grief always searches for simple explanations. Naomi swallowed carefully before continuing. My mother said he was terrified near the end. Not of reporters. Not of prison. Of someone inside your company. Ethan's jaw tightened hard enough to ache. Somewhere behind them, a dishwasher crashed loudly onto a metal counter, making Naomi flinch instinctively. Ethan noticed that too. Fear again. Constant now. Living under her skin. What happened to your mother? He asked quietly. Naomi looked toward the cracked back door where rain tapped softly against the alley pavement outside. She disappeared 3 weeks after Mason died. Ethan felt cold move slowly through his body despite the heat of the kitchen nearby. Disappeared? Naomi nodded once. No goodbye. No warning. She left for work and never came home. Silence settled heavily between them while cooks shouted orders in the background and steam rolled through the kitchen doors. Ethan suddenly remembered the second note again. Your brother did not trust Victor Lang. Slowly, he looked back at Naomi. Did your mother say Victor's name? Naomi did not answer immediately. That frightened Ethan more than if she had. Finally, she whispered, My mother kept a small flash drive hidden inside our apartment after Mason died. Ethan's pulse quickened instantly. Naomi looked directly into his eyes now for the first time all night. Before she vanished, she told me something I never forgot. Her voice trembled slightly despite her effort to stay calm. If anything ever happened to her, I was supposed to find Ethan Cole before Victor Lang found me first. For a moment, Ethan could not speak. The sounds around them blurred together into distant noise. Plates clattering, fryers hissing, rain tapping softly against the alley door. All of it faded behind one impossible realization. Mason had tried to leave him a warning before he died. And somehow, after 5 years of silence, the warning had survived through a waitress standing under fluorescent lights in the back hallway of a steakhouse. Ethan looked at Naomi carefully now, not as staff, not as a stranger, but as someone carrying the final unfinished piece of his brother's life. The flash drive, he said quietly. Do you still have it? Naomi hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. Naomi. She looked down at the floor for a second before answering. I hid it after my mother disappeared. Where? Safe. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose, fighting the pressure building behind his ribs. Years of lawyers, investigators, audits, private security firms, millions of dollars spent trying to understand what really happened to Mason. And now the closest thing to truth stood in front of him, wearing a black apron and non-slip work shoes. The irony almost hurt. Naomi crossed her arms tightly, as if trying to hold herself together. I did not come looking for you before tonight because I did not know who to trust. Ethan nodded once. He understood that feeling better than anyone. What changed? Naomi finally looked him directly in the eye again. Victor Lang came here 3 nights ago. Ethan felt his stomach tighten instantly. He asked for me by name. The fluorescent light above them buzzed softly while Ethan processed the sentence. What did he want? Naomi swallowed carefully. He told my manager he was looking for a woman connected to Mercy General Hospital. Her voice lowered further. Then he asked if my mother ever left anything behind. Ethan's heartbeat turned heavy again. Did you tell him anything? No, did he believe you? Naomi did not answer immediately. That silence was enough. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city again. Ethan rubbed a hand across his jaw, his mind moving faster now, assembling years of broken pieces into something uglier than he wanted to admit. Victor had stayed close after Mason's death. Too close. Publicly supportive. Loyal through every scandal. Every investigation. Every board meeting. Ethan used to call him family. But suddenly, old memories returned sharper than before. Victor always steering conversations away from Mason during internal reviews. Victor quietly firing certain employees after the scandal. Victor insisting the company move forward quickly instead of reopening questions. Ethan had mistaken calmness for wisdom. Maybe it had been control all along. The kitchen door burst open suddenly, and a manager stepped into the hallway holding an order tablet. Naomi, table 14 is asking for you. Naomi straightened instantly, masking fear beneath professionalism, so practiced it looked painful. I will be there in a second. The manager barely glanced at Ethan before disappearing again. Naomi released a shaky breath once they were alone. Ethan noticed how exhausted she looked now. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Tension hidden inside every movement. This woman had been carrying fear for years while serving cocktails to strangers pretending nothing was wrong. Why tonight? Ethan asked softly. Naomi looked toward the dining room entrance where warm, golden light spilled into the hallway. Because I saw Victor walk in. Her voice cracked slightly for the first time. And because 30 minutes before your reservation, somebody slipped a note under my apartment door. Ethan stared at her. What note? Naomi reached slowly into her apron pocket with trembling fingers and unfolded a small piece of paper worn soft at the corners. She handed it to him carefully. Ethan read the sentence once and felt the blood drain from his face. If Ethan Cole learns the truth, neither of you leave Chicago alive. Ethan read the note again slowly, feeling each word settle heavier inside his chest. Not anger, not panic, something colder. The kind of fear that arrives quietly because deep down, part of you already knew the truth before anyone said it out loud. Naomi watched him carefully beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. I almost did not come to work tonight, she admitted softly. I sat in my apartment for an hour staring at that paper trying to decide whether disappearing would be safer. Ethan folded the note carefully and handed it back to her. But you came anyway. Naomi gave a faint, humorless smile. My mother spent her whole life being afraid of powerful men. I promised myself I would not spend mine doing the same. The sentence landed harder than she probably realized. Ethan looked at her differently after that. For years he had surrounded himself with executives who talked endlessly about courage while hiding behind contracts and press conferences the second things became dangerous. But this woman standing in a restaurant hallway with shaking hands and tired eyes had still shown up tonight, knowing someone might be watching her. That kind of courage did not come from power. It came from surviving without it. Ethan glanced toward the dining room entrance again. Victor cannot know we talked. Naomi nodded quickly. He already suspects something. How? Because he keeps looking at me. Her voice dropped lower. Not like a customer. Like somebody trying to remember where they have seen a face before. Ethan felt his jaw tighten again. He knew that look. Victor studied people the same way investors studied numbers. Quietly. Patiently. Until weakness revealed itself. Listen to me carefully, Ethan said. Do not go home tonight. Naomi blinked in surprise. What? If Victor really connected you to your mother, your apartment is the first place he will watch. Naomi folded her arms tightly again. I cannot just disappear. You may have to. The words hung between them heavily. Naomi looked down at the floor tiles for a moment. Exhausted conflict written across her face. Ethan suddenly understood something else then. She had been handling this alone for years. No security team. No lawyers. No money protecting her. Just instinct and caution and whatever strength she could scrape together while balancing trays for strangers who barely looked at her twice. The realization left a bitter ache in Ethan's chest. Because men like him built worlds where women like Naomi paid the price for truths they never created. A loud burst of laughter echoed from the dining room, followed by the sharp clink of whiskey glasses. Ethan glanced around the corner carefully toward Victor's table. Empty. His pulse sharpened instantly. Where is he? Naomi looked past him and froze. Ethan turned. Victor Lang stood at the far end of the hallway near the restrooms, adjusting the cuff of his tailored black coat beneath the dim light. Calm as ever. Controlled. But his eyes were fixed directly on Naomi. For one terrifying second, nobody moved. Rain tapped softly against the back alley door, while kitchen staff rushed past completely unaware of the tension freezing the narrow hallway solid. Then Victor smiled. Warm. Polite. Dangerous. There you are, he said gently toward Naomi. Your manager mentioned you disappeared. Naomi's breathing visibly tightened. Ethan stepped slightly closer beside her without thinking. Victor's eyes shifted to Ethan then, studying him carefully. The older man tilted his head faintly as recognition slowly surfaced across his face. Not shock. Worse than shock. Understanding. Interesting, Victor said quietly. I thought you looked familiar tonight. Ethan held his gaze steadily now. No more hiding. No more pretending. Victor glanced once between them before giving a soft, almost disappointed sigh. You know, he said calmly. Your brother made the same mistake. The hallway went silent. Even the sounds from the kitchen suddenly felt far away. Victor adjusted his watch slowly beneath the fluorescent light. He trusted the wrong people. Naomi stopped breathing for half a second. Ethan felt it beside him. The fear. The realization. The invisible line they had just crossed. Victor Lang stood calmly at the far end of the hallway like a man discussing weather instead of dragging ghosts into the open. His silver hair caught the fluorescent light, while rain murmured softly outside the alley door behind him. Mason always believed truth mattered more than power. Victor continued gently. That was his weakness. Ethan stared at him without blinking now. 5 years of grief, guilt, and confusion settled heavily behind his ribs, but underneath all of it something else had finally begun rising. Clarity. You knew he was scared, Ethan said quietly. Victor adjusted the cuff of his coat again. Fear is natural when people discover things they were never meant to see. Naomi's hands tightened at her sides. Ethan noticed she was shaking slightly now, though her voice stayed steady when she spoke. What happened to my mother? Victor looked at her for the first time with something almost resembling pity. Your mother made unfortunate choices. You threatened her. No, Victor smiled faintly. I warned her. Ethan felt anger flash through him then, sudden and sharp. Not explosive. Worse. Cold. Because Victor still spoke about ruined lives the same way executives discussed quarterly losses. Calmly. Efficiently. Like human beings were numbers on paper. Ethan realized with a sinking feeling that this was the kind of man he had spent decades admiring. Maybe even becoming. A server pushed through the kitchen doors carrying stacked dessert plates before immediately freezing at the tension in the hallway. Victor stepped politely aside to let her pass. Careful, he said warmly. Do not drop those. The waitress nodded nervously and hurried away. And somehow that tiny moment disturbed Ethan more than anything else. Because evil rarely looked monstrous in rooms like these. Sometimes it looked polished, educated, patient. Victor slipped one hand into his coat pocket and looked back toward Ethan. You should leave Chicago tonight. Why? Ethan asked. Because some truths destroy more than reputations. Thunder rolled outside again. Naomi glanced nervously toward the alley exit before lowering her voice. The flash drive, she whispered toward Ethan. Victor's eyes shifted instantly. Tiny movement, barely visible, but Ethan caught it. And Victor knew Ethan caught it too. Silence hardened between all three of them. So it still exists, Victor said softly. Naomi immediately looked down, realizing her mistake. Ethan stepped slightly forward in front of her without thinking. Victor noticed that too. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. Curiosity now. Interesting, Victor murmured. 5 years around billionaires and politicians. And somehow the only honest loyalty left in this city belongs to a waitress. Ethan ignored the comment. What is on the drive? Victor gave a slow, disappointed sigh. Mason recorded conversations he should not have recorded. Ethan's pulse sharpened instantly. Conversations about what? Financial restructuring. Offshore accounts. Board decisions. Victor paused briefly. People protecting the company. Ethan felt sick suddenly. Protecting it from what? Victor's eyes settled heavily onto Ethan now. From collapse. From scandal. From you. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. Victor stepped closer slowly, lowering his voice. Your brother discovered mistakes that would have destroyed coal dynamics overnight. Thousands of employees would have lost jobs. Investors would have panicked. Cities tied to your company would have suffered. Ethan's jaw tightened. So you buried it. I contained it. Naomi looked between them in disbelief. You were talking about people's lives like balance sheets. Victor turned toward her calmly. That is because people with power eventually learn the same lesson. He glanced back at Ethan. There are no clean choices at the top. Only expensive ones. Ethan stared at him for a long moment while rain hammered harder against the alley door. Then slowly, quietly, he shook his head. No, he said. That is the lie men like you tell yourselves after forgetting what it means to be human. For the first time all night, Victor's smile disappeared completely. The hallway fell silent after Ethan spoke. Not dramatic silence. Worse, the kind that forces people to hear themselves clearly for the first time in years. Victor Lang stood motionless beneath the fluorescent lights, his expression colder now, stripped clean of charm. Naomi remained beside Ethan, tense but steady, her tired eyes moving carefully between both men while rain battered the alley outside harder than before. Somewhere in the dining room, a piano version of an old Frank Sinatra song drifted faintly through the walls, soft and elegant against the tension choking the hallway. Victor looked at Ethan for a long moment before finally speaking. You still think morality survives inside corporations worth billions of dollars? Ethan did not answer immediately, because 5 years ago, he probably would have agreed with him. That realization hurt more than he expected. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. Your brother believed exposing everything would save people. It would not have. It would have burned the company to the ground. Maybe it needed to burn, Ethan replied quietly. Victor almost smiled at that. Easy thing to say now. Ethan stared back steadily. No. Hard thing to finally admit. Naomi looked at Ethan, then, with something new in her expression. Not fear this time. Recognition. As if she realized the billionaire standing beside her was no longer the same man who built his empire by trusting silence over truth. Victor noticed it too. His gaze hardened slightly. You think she saved you tonight? He asked. She did not. He gestured lightly toward the dining room. Tomorrow morning investors will still care about stock prices. Politicians will still protect donors. News outlets will still sell outrage for ratings. His eyes settled heavily on Ethan. And men like you will still be expected to choose survival over honesty. Ethan glanced briefly toward Naomi. A black waitress earning tips under golden restaurant lights while carrying secrets. Powerful men had spent years trying to bury. She had no board seat, no lawyers, no influence. Yet somehow she had shown more integrity than everyone surrounding Ethan for the last decade combined. The realization settled painfully inside him. That is where you are wrong, Ethan said finally. Victor raised an eyebrow faintly. Ethan continued quietly. I spent years believing power meant protecting the company at any cost. His eyes drifted toward the dining room, where wealthy guests laughed over expensive wine, completely unaware that lives had been shattered to preserve their comfortable world. But all we really protected was ourselves. Victor's expression darkened now. Careful. No, Ethan replied softly. That is what Mason was trying to tell me before he died. The older man's jaw tightened for the first time all night. Small movement. Tiny crack. But Ethan saw it. Naomi saw it too. Truth unsettled people who built their lives avoiding it. Victor looked toward Naomi again. Where is the drive? Naomi held his gaze this time, without lowering her eyes. Safe. Victor exhaled slowly through his nose. You do not understand what happens if those files become public. Maybe people deserve to know anyway. Naomi answered quietly. Victor shook his head almost sadly. You still believe truth changes systems. Naomi's voice remained calm. No, I believe silence protects the wrong people. The sentence landed heavily in the narrow hallway. Ethan looked at her again then, really looked at her. This woman had spent years afraid, isolated, surviving quietly after losing her mother to secrets connected to his world. Yet somehow she still believed honesty mattered. Ethan realized suddenly that he had not met many people like that lately. Maybe not for years. Victor checked his watch calmly before speaking again. Federal investigators reopened inquiries into Mason's death last month. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What? Quietly. Victor nodded toward Naomi. Someone has already been talking. Naomi looked genuinely surprised. Ethan's pulse sharpened instantly. Who? Victor's expression turned unreadable once more. That, he said softly, is why neither of you are safe. Anymore. Then from somewhere inside the dining room, a woman's voice suddenly called out loud enough to cut through the tension. Mr. Lang? Your driver says there are reporters outside. Victor's face changed instantly. Not fear. Calculation. And Ethan realized in that exact moment the night was no longer under Victor Lang's control. Victor Lang looked toward the dining room entrance as restaurant staff hurried past whispering about cameras gathering outside beneath the ring. For the first time that night, the perfect calm around him fractured slightly. Not panic. Calculation. Fast and cold behind tired eyes that had spent decades surviving rooms exactly like this one. Ethan noticed it immediately. Powerful men rarely feared truth itself. They feared losing control of the story. Reporters? Ethan asked quietly. Victor straightened the sleeve of his coat one final time before answering. The world loves scandals involving billionaires. His gaze shifted briefly toward Naomi, especially when dead brothers and missing nurses become part of the headline. Naomi's face tightened, but she did not step back this time. Ethan saw the difference in her now. Earlier that night, she looked like someone trying to survive unnoticed. Now she looked tired of hiding. Victor glanced once between them before speaking again. Whatever you think happens next, understand this carefully. There are names connected to those files far bigger than mine. Ethan held his gaze. Then maybe they should finally be afraid too. The older man studied Ethan for a long moment, almost like he was searching for traces of the younger executive he used to control. But something had changed tonight. Not because of the reporters outside. Not because of the investigation reopening. Because somewhere between the bourbon, the rain, and the handwritten notes slipped beside a steak dinner, Ethan Cole finally remembered what his brother had died trying to protect. Conscience. Victor seemed to realize it too. His expression hardened quietly. You really are going to destroy everything Mason tried to build. Ethan shook his head slowly. No. Men like you already did that. Silence settled heavily in the hallway again. Then Victor gave a faint, exhausted nod, almost respectful despite himself. Your brother once said the exact same thing to me. Those words hit Ethan harder than expected. For years he avoided thinking about Mason for too long because guilt always followed close behind. Guilt for dismissing him. Guilt for doubting him. Guilt for choosing the company over his own blood when it mattered most. But standing there now beside Naomi beneath cheap fluorescent lights, Ethan understood something painful and simple at the same time. Mason had not died because he was weak. He died because he refused to become like the people around him. And somehow, tonight, a waitress carrying another family's buried pain had forced Ethan to finally see it clearly. Victor stepped back slightly toward the dining room. If you release those files, there is no coming back from it. Ethan answered quietly. Maybe there should not be. A manager suddenly rushed down the hallway holding a phone. Mr. Lang, the press knows Ethan Cole is here. Victor closed his eyes briefly. Just 1 second. Then the mask returned. Calm. Polished. Untouchable. Of course they do, he murmured. Naomi looked at Ethan carefully. What happens now? Ethan turned toward her fully for the first time all night. The warm light from the dining room caught the tired edges of her face, while rain continued hammering Chicago outside. Now, he said softly, we stop hiding. 1 year later, the federal investigation into Cole Dynamics became one of the largest corporate corruption cases in modern Chicago history. Several executives resigned. Offshore accounts were exposed. Thousands of sealed documents connected to Mason Cole's recordings entered public record. Victor Lang disappeared from public life entirely after testifying behind closed doors for nearly 11 hours. But the story people remembered most was not about billionaires or boardrooms. It was about a black waitress named Naomi Brooks who spent 5 years protecting evidence powerful men wanted buried forever. Ethan Cole never returned as chief executive officer of Cole Dynamics. Instead, he quietly launched the Mason Cole Foundation, funding legal protection and scholarships for hospital workers, whistleblowers, and families affected by corporate corruption. And on a rainy Thursday night nearly 1 year after Blackstone Prime changed both their lives, Ethan walked back into the restaurant alone. Same piano, same amber lights, same smell of rosemary and bourbon in the air. Naomi looked up from the service counter and froze in surprise. Ethan smiled softly before sliding a folded note across the table toward her. Naomi opened it carefully. 5 simple words stared back at her beneath the warm restaurant lights. He would have been proud. Naomi looked up again, eyes shining quietly now, while Ethan stepped back toward the door. He came to that restaurant hunting for secrets hidden by powerful men. But the waitress handed him something money could never buy back. His humanity.